Hello and welcome to another video. In today's video, I'd like to talk about the issue of how can we spend less money on art supplies while still feeling that we have everything we need. The first tip that I have is know what you already have. So you have a lot of art supplies already, and sometimes the reason you want to go out and buy more is because you feel that you don't have enough art supplies to make art. So in order to get a feeling or a sense of what you have, what I like to do is to organize my art supplies. And by that I mean seriously take everything, all of the art supplies out of the boxes, out of the closets, bring them all together in one place and start organizing all of the watercolor brushes together, all of the gel pens, all of the watercolor paint, all of the alcohol markers. And in each category, you'll start to see that you have quite a few supplies per category, and you actually have quite a few categories of art supplies or mediums or paper or sketchbooks that you haven't yet used. So for example, if you were really craving getting another sketchbook, you might see that you already have 5 empty sketchbooks or 5 half-empty sketchbooks that you can use today, and you don't have to go out and spend money and buy more. Also, by organizing your art supplies, it'll be easier for you to access them. You might find art supplies that you forgot you have, and your art space will be more tidy, and that's always a good thing, at least in my opinion. My next tip is to use what you have and also to use what you don't use. What I mean by that is now that you've organized your stuff and saw what you have, use some of what you have, and especially use the things you don't use. So I have a bunch of alcohol-based markers that have been sitting around for maybe a year, maybe 2 years, and I'm not sure how long they'll last before they dry out. So why not sit down for an hour and doodle and color in my doodle using those markers, or maybe practice blending. I also have some gel pens that I haven't been using because I've been more into watercolor lately. The reason I didn't use the gel pens for a while was because I thought, gel pens, they're for kids and I'm over them and I'm into watercolor now. But I took out my gel pens and I made things that I didn't even remember I could make. And I actually made things that I've never made before. Switching up the media that you're using can help you get out of a rut and be more creative. And, then you can bring some of what you learned from one medium across to another medium. By using what you don't use, you're actually pretending that your stash of art supplies is an art store and you're getting stuff for free. So that's one great thing about using what you don't use, and that way you save a lot of money on art supplies. You're still making art, you're still growing and learning. My next tip sounds a little bit zen. Be okay with wanting all the things, but not having all the things. So just acknowledge that we live in an abundant world and we're very lucky to have access to so many art supplies. There are so many manufacturers and so many different mediums. You don't really need all of them. You probably just need to sit down and work with what you have rather than getting another new thing. You just need enough to make art. My next tip is a bit more practical, and it has to do with, you are going to get art supplies at some point or another, right? So what I do when I need art supplies is I write them down in a list that I call my wants list. In this list, I write down everything I want to buy. So if I see something that I'm excited about, I write it down in my wants list. This way I have a list and I know that these things aren't going to be forgotten. So there's no need to run off and buy them because they're in the list. And then I don't go and buy these things. What I do is I let the things sit in the list. They sit in this list for a few weeks, maybe longer. And during that time, maybe I want new things and I write those new things in the list. And the things I wrote down in the list a long time ago, maybe I'm not that into them and I'm not really interested in spending the money for buying them. So maybe I erase them, or maybe I put them in a list that I call maybe, or in a list that I call probably not. Maybe only 25% of what I put in the list actually gets purchased. So imagine if instead of writing things in the wants list, I would have just gone out and bought them. I would have bought 4 times more stuff. When you let things sit in your wants list, you're giving yourself time to think in a cool-headed fashion and not in that state where you're really excited and you really want this art supply. You give yourself time to realize that you have what you need and you don't really need this very specific tool. One example I can give is that I was really interested, really curious in trying out Inktense blocks. I know some artists that have tried them and I've seen some videos and I just want to try them myself out of curiosity. But I realized that they're basically ink. So I prefer to get ink rather than Inktense blocks and work using ink. Another tip I have is research. So sometimes when you research on YouTube about art supplies, that sort of backfires and you want to buy all of the art supplies. But sometimes when you research about a tool, you either realize it's very similar to something else that you already have, or you realize that the downsides of this particular art supply makes it not very appealing for you to buy. And sometimes the opposite thing happens. Sometimes you research about an art supply and you realize that you should be spending more money on a different type of art supply, maybe something more professional. It goes both ways, but usually it helps you hone in on what you really need and let go of what you don't need. By researching, you're trying to minimize things that you're going to buy and regret. My next tip is to buy a limited subset of each medium. So for example, one day I went out and I bought some Prismacolor colored pencils. I got maybe 6 Prismacolor pencils. I wasn't into them. I didn't like them. I preferred using water-based markers, alcohol markers, and later on watercolor and inks. I wasn't into them, so it's really great that I only bought 6. It would probably have been better if I'd only have bought 2. If you're like me and you want to try out all sorts of different media and you want to have a bit of everything, then it makes sense to buy a limited subset of each to get the most out of it without spending all your money on just that specific medium. My next tip is not to visit the art store physically, but to shop online. When you go to the art store, you see all of the art supplies that you want and you get back into that excited mode where you want to buy everything. At least that's what happens to me. I end up buying things I didn't even think I wanted. I end up wanting to buy things like stuff having to do with printmaking, and I forget that I already have a ton of media that I'm experimenting with and I want to add another media. And it's not something that I've actually sat down and considered. It's just something that spur of the moment I thought of just because I was at the art store. And this is why I prefer not to go, to avoid getting into that place where I just buy things that I regret buying. Another reason I don't visit the art store is because they don't have everything I want. If, for example, like I said, I have things in my wants list and I researched them and I chose the exact specific brand that I want and the exact quantity, the exact color that I want, and I go to the art store and they don't have it, then what happens often is that either I'm disappointed or I end up getting an alternative. And the alternative is often not something that makes me happy because it's not what I chose. Another reason I don't go to the art store is because you put your stuff in your little basket and then you go to the cash register, and only after the cashier lets everything through, you know how much it's going to cost. And when you shop online, that doesn't happen. You know how much everything's going to cost before you pay for it. So you can realize that you went overboard this time and maybe remove some of the things from your shopping cart or reconsider some of your purchases, maybe buy smaller containers, maybe buy less of a specific color range that you put in your cart. So when you're at the art store, you can't really do that. You can, but it's a bit bothersome to the people behind you in line to say, okay, wait, I want to take some of these things out. And I can't do that. It's hard for me to think spur of the moment. It's easier for me to have a cool head when I'm sitting at home at the computer, maybe leave some things in my shopping cart for a while before I deal with the price of what I'm about to buy. And the last and final reason I don't go to the art store is because for me, it takes a while to get there. It's hard to find parking. So I often tell myself, well, since I'm here, I may as well buy this and this and this and this because it was such a bother to get there. This causes me, again, to buy things I shouldn't have bought and I regret buying. And that money that I spent on those things could have been spent much more wisely on higher quality art supplies and on supplies that I'm actually going to use. And so my suggestion is to shop online. And my final tip is to be grateful for what you have and acknowledge the abundance of art supplies that you already have and notice that even though you haven't bought any art supplies today or yesterday, you were making art, you were making beautiful things, and you still had a lot of art supplies that you weren't using that could have been used to make more beautiful art. Enjoy your art supplies and use your money wisely to get what you really need and get good quality art supplies and get stuff that you're actually going to use. I hope you found this video helpful. Please let me know in the comments what you think about this issue, and if you have any problems like I do with wanting to buy all of the art supplies, and if you have any tips about how to save money and still get all the art supplies you actually need. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to leave a thumbs up if you enjoyed this video and subscribe if you haven't already done so. I'll see you in the next one.